when it's all said and done, you feel like, yeah, it was good to be here. And it always is good to look at God's word and see what he has to say. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Paul just got done talking about the body. The congregation is a spiritual body. And even though there's many members, what? One body. And that's the point he made 4 times. That everyone's valuable. You might say, well, I'm just a big toe. Yeah, and we talked about that. You're necessary for the body to function normally. And so everybody should be valued and equally honored. And because when one member suffers, they all suffered. So many members, one body. And then he said one body, but it's individually, you are a member of that body. You are part of Christ's body, the local church. Now he's going to talk about love being a more excellent way. You say, well, how did he get to that discussion? Look with me in chapter 12 in verse 27. That's where we left off. Now you are Christ's body, and individually, we're part of Christ's body here in South Salem. Now he says, going back to the general overall context, which they were having division over spiritual gifts, and we'll return to that, Lord willing. He said, God is appointing the church apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gift of healings, administrations, and various kind of tongues. And he's going to use an example of many members, one body. Are everybody apostle in the church? Well, the answer is, well, of course not. They're not all prophets, are they? Again, no. They're not all teachers? No, of course not. They're not all workers of miracles? Well, again, the answer is no. They don't all have gifts of healings, do they? They do not speak with tongues, do they? They don't all interpret, do they? So he says, earnestly desire the greatest gift. Understand that what you have been given as a gift to God is valuable to the body. But he says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And it's not about gifts, because they were using their specific gift to elevate themselves over others. It's like someone saying, well, I'm a mouth and you're just a toe. And the gift of speaking in tongues, for some reason, elevated above all them all. He says, let's talk about a better way. Because the church at Corinth was a divided church, wasn't it? And we go back to our theme where he says, I know there's divisions. I hear this, that exist among you. But I don't want you to have any disagreements. I want you to have the same mind and agree on everything. You say, well, that's not possible. There is a way it can happen. There is a more excellent way. And that introduces chapter 13, love. All right? Now, when we talk about love, we just got to do some background work real quickly. There are 4 Greek words that are used to describe the word love. Because in English, we just have one word, love. And love is the most misunderstood concept when it comes to biblical love. You know, Paul McCartney, all the world needs is love. Well, that's true, but what is love? And so many songs are talked about love, and if we just loved one another, everything would be fine. Well, that's true if it was godly type of love, but the world's concept of love, you fall in of love, then you fall out of love. And if someone says, well, I'm leaving you in a marriage. You go, well, why? Well, I don't love you anymore. Or, I love this other person. What? How come could you stop loving someone? Well, because their concept of love is not godly love. When God tells man to love his wife, they have a skewed idea of it. So the first word in the Greek is eros. It's sexual or physical love. It's not used in the New Testament at all. The second word is storge. It's a family love. Is that natural to have family love? Blood is thicker than water. And it's natural to have family emotions tied to each other. Phileo is brotherly love, and we know that from the city of Philadelphia. Agape, we've probably all heard of that. That's the word we're talking about. It's almost like it's a made-up word for the New Testament. It's very rarely, maybe 4 or 5 times in classical Greek ever used. But in the New Testament, we see it used over and over. And it's manifested by Jesus when he come to the earth, because as we're going to look, well, John 3:16 is going to be our working biblical definition of agape. So we could have God explain to us what it means. But before we look at it, this love is at the height of every list when we're talking about applying Christian virtues to your life. 2 Peter chapter 1, add to your faith virtue, self-control, knowledge, and then godliness, then he says perseverance, then brotherly love, and what's at the top? Love. And 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, brethren, let us love, because he who was born of God loves like God, and he who does not love does not know God. If we don't love, we have no relationship with God at all. It's so essential, because when you're part of God's family, you take on his characteristics. And when you're born of him, you're expected to grow up to be just like him. So if we don't love, we miss the boat. Christianity is religion, and it's not Christianity. A lot of people are very religious, but they don't get Christianity. What did Jesus say to about the greatest 2 commandments in the Bible? What were they?
Love your neighbor as yourself.
Love God.
And then love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor. And when you look at the 10 commandments, what do you see the first 4 all about?
God.
Loving God. And then what? 5 through 10 about how to love your neighbor. It's all that's been practiced from the very beginning. It's love, agape. So what does this word mean? Well, we know John 3:16. It's probably the most recognizable verse in the whole world. If people don't know but one verse, they'll know this one. And if you've watched a lot of football over the years, what do you see in the end zone? John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. And you say, how do I get a definition of love out of that? Well, here we go. First of all, love is an attitude. God so loved. And I'm going to tell you it's an emotional attitude. A lot of people would say, there's not really a lot of emotion in agape love. It's an act of the will. Now, obviously, it's an act of the will. That's why you don't fall in and out of agape love. When it says to love your wives, it's not just something you just, well, I don't feel like it today. No, it's something you choose to do. So, but it is emotional, because it's built on perceived value. When you have a perception of someone's value, you're always going to act in their best interest. So it's emotional. It has compassion built into it. It's intrinsic about just God, when he looks at us as children, he could not do something. Do you follow what I just said? When opportunity comes to act and to help, he cannot not help. He didn't have to think about it like, He's motivated and to do it immediately. And that's why it leads us to the next word. It's an attitude held towards someone. A lot of people say, well, I love. If you don't love someone, you don't love, biblically. Well, I'm a lover and not a fighter. No, agape love is held towards an individual. Husband, love your wives. We're supposed to love our children. Jesus said, don't hate your enemies, but what? Love your enemies. Pray for them. Yes?
Well, I always thought of it as God loved us when we weren't loving.
That's right. We were once enemies, yet he still loved us. So it's always directed towards someone. Here's the big thing. God so loved, he had this attitude towards the world that he gave. If there is no action, there is no love. It starts in the roots of your bowels, this compassion, because this perceived self-worth of an individual. And then when they're in harm's way, or there's something you can do within your ability to help them, you cannot say no. You will always act all the time. And if there is no action, there's no love. I said, man, this is a bigger word than I thought it was. That's why it's the height, the last virtue when you climb these ladders of Christian virtues. It's the one that the mature Christian achieves in his life. So it causes one to act. What did God give when he saw the world was lost? His only begotten Son. So when you give, there's no strings attached. It's freely. He gave. He didn't charge, right? He didn't sell. He gave. It's a gift. And so where was I? People were giving these gifts out, and after, I want to mention it because there's someone here. And then afterwards, they were asking for money for them. Is that a gift? When you give something away, then you put your hand out? No. God gave freely, and then second of all, it's sacrificially. Because if you give something of no value, is that love? If it doesn't cost you something, it's not love. Well, I didn't need this anyway, so there you go. No, there's no love if it's not sacrificial of your time, your energy, your possessions. Now think of the Good Samaritan. He's crying out perhaps for help because he's been beaten. He's bleeding. He's going to die, and who comes by? Two religious people, a Levite and a priest. And when they see him, what do? Did they act like God? No. Love never walks on the other side. When it is given an opportunity and you have the ability, you have responsibility. Those are two words together. Opportunity plus ability. I can't feed the whole world because I don't have the ability. But if I encounter one person that's hungry, I can choose to either walk by the other side, or else I can reach in my pocket, sacrificially help them because I have the opportunity and the ability. That makes me responsible. That's responsibility, is accountability plus opportunity. And love always does it. And it's not begrudgingly, okay, if I have to. We'll talk about that in a second. It's freely. And it's not looking for anything back from the person. And here's the biggest thing, it's the hardest. It always acts in their best interest. Because God looked at the world and said, they're all lost. I'm the only one that can do something about it.